One of my early teachers of psychoanalysis said, remember, if you ask questions, you will get answers, nothing more. But human beings have been asking questions since the day they were born. Questions, questions, questions. We need to ask questions. What do I need to do to avoid conflict? What must we do to stay healthy? Is it possible to prevent our children from being damaged? How can we protect them from destructiveness? Reduce the likelihood of disease? Questions. We need to ask questions. Or will we just close down and say, all questions, nothing else, questions, questions, and you don't give the answers? So we become impatient and we don't want to ask any more questions. Close down. It is one thing to ask questions, but if you know the person is lying or deceiving you, or is not even interested, or is only seeing one small segment of the situation, what's the point? So you walk away. If you ask questions, you get answers, nothing more. So you ask your friend, what did you do yesterday? And the reply is nothing much. Is that the answer? Did you go to work for a little while? What else did you do? Nothing much. Did you see Douglas at work? In passing. Questions, 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 answers, answers, answers. Perhaps we fear what might follow. There is the concealed frustration. There is the unspoken word. There is the undeclared emotion. There is the impatient behavior. There is the evasive answer. There is the unacknowledged guilt, perhaps, whatever the emotion. There it is, hidden from us. So you ask the question, do you get the proper answer? So they asked Jesus, why was this man born blind? Was it because of a birth fault? Was it because of something his parents did, the behavior? Was it the birth? Was it the behavior of the parents? Was it his behavior? Or was there some blundering of their beliefs somewhere there and this person became blind? Jesus replied, no, not because of his birth, not because of his behavior, not because of his parents' behavior. None of that. He was born so that the power of God might be displayed in curing him. And as I said earlier, this is a very unsatisfactory answer, especially when you don't believe that the power of God is curing him. So if we turn the question or the answer around, perhaps Jesus could have also been saying, if we'd like to inject into this question, he was saying it's important to know what the condition is. It's important for us to know how to cure him if we can. It's important to collaborate with people in looking after him. There's a community of healing here, perhaps. There's also the spirit of compassion. So within all of those words that I just mentioned, studying the condition, looking for the cure, entering into a collaboration, being part of a community of healing, recognizing the importance of compassion. Within those, perhaps we do see one of the great gifts that have been given to us in life, and we might call that the power of God being displayed for this particular situation. The oncologist Rajana Srivastava, who's known to us here in this congregation, I'm hoping to launch her new book, although it's starting to be a little bit old now. It's been out a few months. But this new book of hers says, So It's Cancer. That's the title. So It's Cancer. Now what? Now what? At some point, you see, it will be worth asking the question, why did this person get cancer? And the really challenging question hits home. Now that the diagnosis is there, now what? What will we do? So it is important to pursue the question of how it happened. It is important to pursue the question of the cure for this disease. But if those doors are closing, what then? Does God, does your religion play any part in the matter? The matter of why it happened? The matter of what then will you do? Does your religion give you any support? Any soothing? Any compassion? Any courage? If those components are present in your faith, then are we aware of that? Do we allow it to emerge in our experience? We might be devastated by the diagnosis, understandably. But then most of us would want to get on with the business of defeating the disease. And so the question of a Sunday morning address on religion seems pretty irrelevant. But stay with me for just a moment more. Because someone was likely to say, oh yes, remember your grandmother had cancer. Your mother had cancer. And you've been on a smoker-stressed treadmill for a number of years. If so much is already in place and so much is already known, how can you expect a God you hardly believe in to be able to fix it? So you might be like Job and say, why is God doing this to me? I didn't do anything. Was it my parent? Was it my grandparents? Why is he doing this? But are we really studying the issues involved? And the question becomes even more challenging when we lift these questions beyond a personal crisis. Why have I got cancer? Why this? Why that? About myself. To see that we're dealing with a community disease or an international concern, an international crisis, an air crash, a human catastrophe of huge proportions. And the wider question of the riddle of the universe hits us anyway. Why do bad things happen to good people? As Rabbi Kushner said many years ago. In the wide wash of events, we become confused, we become helpless, we get angry, we get hurt, we're damaged, we become life's casualty, with a large covering of disillusionment and disbelief, discontent and emotional deadness all over us. When we get bogged down in questions that can't be answered, what then? So we're likely to stop asking the questions. What's the point of going on asking questions? And indeed, we go further than that. We stop listening to the questions that we're not even asking, not even articulating. So much of my work deals with that very issue, to help people articulate the questions that they're not really hearing, are being asked deep down in their own psychological mind and state. So in becoming increasingly disillusioned with the God issue, we set our faces to cope with the crisis and the catastrophe as best we can, with any resource that we can grab as we go by. But we could do better. We could do better if we stop a while and realize that an essential task is to listen to the questions of everyday existence, the existential question. And in this regard, I'm going to point to two major resources. First, to therapy, psychological therapy, and second, to theology. a revised theology, if you like. So let me ask the question, first of all, what does psychological therapy do in this situation? Well, it opens up the painful experiences of life, and it allows the healing process to begin. It drains away the toxic emotions, all that toxic energy, and refocuses on the healing environments or the healing nourishments that can be made available to you. It establishes that the healing process is a process to follow, because often we give up on the healing process. We need to establish that the healing process is a process to follow, rather than accepting that your stranded status in the sea of emotional toxins or poisons. Therapy, it strengthens and re-strengthens the strengths of your inner self. We need to be in touch with the strengths within yourself, whatever the question you're asking. It lifts us. Therapy lifts us out of the fear of losing ourselves, of losing our self-strengths. And in lifting us out of that fear, it begins to restore the faith in the healing process. Faith. That faith in the healing process, no matter who you are, no matter what your belief might be in terms of religion, faith in a healing process is so very vital. Therapy affirms the comfort and support of key people and key processes. The healing community, the helpful community, the therapeutic community, so vital to us. So there are a few points as to what psychological therapy can do for us. One of the gifts we have available to us. What can theology do? It tells you to pause and re-own yourself as a person of worth. You see, Job was faced with the question in the Old Testament story. He was faced with the question of whether his God had cast him off. He was a nobody. Everything was happening, and so to him, and the tragedy and trauma, one after the other, he was a nobody. He didn't count. But he stood up and said, yes, I do count. I'm going to tell you again, I'm going to stand firm. I count as a person of worth. I will put before my God my case. So theology asserts the importance of you. It asserts the transformation of distressing memories into memories of strength. So you can dwell on the terrible things of the past, or you can filter those to one side for a moment and allow the better memories, the memories of your strengths and good experiences to come through. Theology identifies the healing symbols. Here in this place, they're all around you, both up here and around through the windows, the tapestry, through Mingary. The healing symbols are there, and they are soothing. They have a soothing, significant power if you're open to it. Theology articulates the words, I want to be healed. Again and again, Jesus of Nazareth confronted people with the question, do you want to be healed? Yes, I want to be healed. That's an important statement. Theology listens to the words of faith. It listens to the music of faith. It listens to the meditations of faith. It listens to the sacraments of faith. It listens to the symbols of faith. It lifts you into the awareness of the strength of a wider ambience, a wider world view in which you have a valued place. We sometimes forget it, close it down, and become part of our own angry space. But allow yourself to be open to the healing space. In several places, several ways, the book of Job gives us a strengthening blend of therapy and theology. It acknowledges the pain behind the questions. The reality is there. And there is a beautiful way it has of God speaking to Job, and Job speaking to God out of the storms of life. And God says to him in this mythological language, brace yourself, stand up, and I will ask the questions, and you will answer. Because you've been asking the questions and expecting me to answer you in the way you want me to answer them. But now let me ask the questions. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the world? So you see, in that very question, one of the first questions, he is lifted out of himself and placed in a wider context. Where were you? Who watched over the birth of the sea? Did you? Have you comprehended the vast expanse of the world? Did you proclaim the laws that govern the heavens? Or determine the laws of nature on earth? Do you count when the mountain goats are born? Or do you count the months that they carry their young? Does your skill teach the hawk how its pinions are to be placed and how it should speed its wings toward the south? In all these questions, Job is faced with this wider, bigger world than himself, with wonders he had not paused to consider. He was so busy doing his thing, protecting his families, doing all that he needed to make himself, in the book of Job, a very successful, effective human being. But at the end of this one-way conversation, Job said, I'm hearing a different voice. And hearing that voice, I am reduced to silence. And I put my fingers to my lips. I have too often spoken of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. I knew, in fact, that I was understanding your purposes secondhand, by report. But now I'm beginning to see deeply into the mystery of life, and I am moved to awe and wonder. What a difference it makes to the human being when they realize that they can be moved to awe and wonder. Sigmund Freud, in formulating his psychoanalysis that was to affect generation after generation, searched for the resources and through the residues of the human mind, from his culture, from his religion, from all the questions he could ask. He wondered about the existence of God. Was it a reality or an illusion? And at the end of his life, he was still wondering about the mystery. But one thing was quite certain. In all of his fascinating exploration of the mind and the complexity of his interactions with the wider world around him, he was encouraging all of us to expand our awareness of what it means to be a human being, coexisting with other human beings in ways that would secure the survival of civilization. What a wider view, and we can be part of it. He, along with the voices of the past, the personages of Job and so on, knew what it was to be deeply affected by the hurts, by the traumas, by the tragedies of life, in large scale and in the small. But he sustained his belief in the healing process. and he participated extensively and deeply within it. Now, many of us, many people, having run into difficulty, distress, or disaster, having collided with conflict, they become injured. And they keep that injury incubated for years on end. They sometimes accept that their injury is the mark of their identity. But the truth is that from the most shocking event, a strength can open up and a healing can take place, and you can become a new person. Your theology says that. We can become the new person. Our hardness is softened through receiving inspiration. And our hardness is softened by giving inspiration. So we ask the questions about this and this and this. Of course, we often think that we have the answers. But perhaps we should pause for just a moment and say, but will God answer? Change the word God for a moment and say, will life answer? Will life reveal its secrets to us? The poor person of Job feared that he had been discarded as unimportant, but he knew that life was an engagement. Every person is valued in that engagement. You are valued in this engagement. When we do not get the answer we feel we should have, there is an understandable tendency to close the conversation. Why go on asking more questions, persisting, when no satisfactory answer will come? And so we get disgruntled, aggravated, and resentful, and we go into ourselves, into a smaller world, into a narrow environment. But we can see that there are other people around us that sometimes nudge us to ask different questions and give us a different view. Friends can be important, even when they're being aggravating. So Job was encouraged to lift himself out of his enclosed out of his enclosed situation and his inner questioning, and be part of a much larger view. From self-protection and self-defense, and from self-definition and self-everything, to a larger life. From a demand and an interrogation attitude, he moved to a different appreciation of how life could be enriching, enlarging, and expansive. So our questions. We search for an answer to our why. But the effective question is not why, but how will we live? How will we live the best life we can now that this and that has happened? We need to be aware that our why can easily run into resentment, to discontent, into pain, into neurosis, into physical ailments. We need to sideline, if we can, as much as we can, that negative emotional state. We need a therapeutic presence, a therapeutic mood to do that. From those frustrating questions. And then begin to choose to absorb ourselves into positive pursuits, to allow healing and regrowth and a new life to emerge. So what is all this about? The search is to satisfy our why. Why is this happening? But we need to say again, what will we do now that this has happened? Sometimes the why is impossible. So instead of getting absorbed in those emotions, that can defeat us, in fact. We need to allow ourselves to be open to a wider view. We sideline those negative emotions and those unsatisfied questions, so that once again we're in a choice situation. Sigmund Freud said what we're trying to do is to bring from the depths of our mind a conscious awareness of who we really are, what we really are, and that allows us to make choices. The question then is not why we are that, but whether we will become what is possible for us to become. Bigger people, able to see ourselves in a different light, and for us also to become part of that wider healing environment. Would you please stand? Would you say with me, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen. So the blessing I use is a blessing that lifts us, places us within a wider context. And it says, listen, because in that wider context, the God language, the God presence may be there for us, is there for us. So the blessing for today. May the God you see in all the colours of creation arouse in you a sense of awe and wonder. May the God who is a sacred presence be real to you. May the God who is a source of inspiration and courage keep calling you forwards. May your God go with you and bless you today and always.